The town of Marinvale had a way of keeping to itself. Hidden between the green shoulders of South Wales, it lay wrapped in fog, forgotten by railroads and headlines. Its people lived by rhythm, mining, mending, and mourning. And then, one spring morning in 1954, the mine collapsed. It began with a sound like thunder caught beneath the earth, a roar that rose through the soil, bending the trees and shattering windows. Then came the silence, a silence that swallowed the air itself. 27 men went down that day. Only 4 came back alive. By sunset, Marinvale was no longer a town, it was a wound. The widows sat on porches with lamps that wouldn't stay lit. The pastor spoke of hope, but looked away when he said the word. And the mine, that black mouth on the edge of the valley, stayed open, breathing dust. It was a week later, on a Tuesday, when he came. The fog had thickened that morning, curling low across the cobbled road that wound through the village square. The air was damp with coal smoke and dew. And then, out of that grayness, a man appeared. Tall, pale coat, a black hat that caught no glint of light. He walked like someone who already knew where every step would land. Children stopped their games to watch him. Dogs barked once, then hid. He carried no suitcase, no cart, only a small leather book tucked beneath his arm. When he reached the tavern door, he paused, removed his hat, and said softly to the innkeeper, "A room for a few nights, perhaps longer if your town allows." The innkeeper nodded, uneasy. Something about the man felt wrong. Not wicked, not threatening, just absent. Like his presence was a shadow of something that wasn't really there. And then the innkeeper saw it. As the man stepped into the lantern light, his boots reflected, but no shadow followed him. He introduced himself as Mr. Corvain, no first name, no past, said he was a merchant dealing in intangibles. At night, he sat at the tavern corner, writing in his small book with deliberate strokes. No one saw the ink glisten. No one saw him eat or drink. He asked quiet questions about the mine, about the town, about the cost of loss. The bartender, a man named Rhys Owen, finally asked what business brought him there. Corvain smiled faintly, his voice low and precise. "I help towns find balance when the scales have tipped too far." Rhys frowned. "Balance, is it? You've come to the wrong valley for that." Corvin's eyes were a strange gray, not cold, just still. "I never come to the wrong place, Mr. Owen. The question is whether your people are ready to pay for what they want back." By the second night, word had spread. The man without a shadow, a rumor turning into a heartbeat. Reverend Morgan called a meeting in the church hall. The room smelled of damp wood and wax. Men still in their coal-stained jackets filled the benches, eyes hollow from grief. Widows clutched scarves and whispered names into their hands. Corvin stood near the front, calm, polite, his hands folded on his cane. The Reverend began, "We have suffered much, and we must not let despair guide us into folly. This man claims to help. We shall hear him, and then decide." Corvin bowed slightly. "Thank you, Reverend. I come not with sermons, but with solutions." He spoke with the kind of certainty people mistake for truth. He told them he could restore Marin Vale's fortune, reopen the mine, bring commerce, heal the soil. But he said there must be an offering, not money, not lives, something far simpler. Each of you must surrender what you have in abundance, your shadows. A silence filled the room like fog through a graveyard. Someone laughed nervously. Another muttered a curse. Corvin smiled gently. "Do not be alarmed. It is a harmless transaction. You will live as before, eat, breathe, love. You will simply be lighter." Reverend Morgan stood. "And what would you gain from this offering, Mr. Corvain?" "Only what you no longer need," Corvain said, eyes glinting. "And perhaps, in return, what you truly desire." Despite warnings, desperation moves faster than faith. Within a week, half the town had gathered in the square at dusk, the air dim, lanterns flickering, fog curling like living smoke. Corvain stood in the center, the little book in his hands. Each person signed a line beside their name, the ink blacker than night. He spoke one word, a sound like wind drawn backward, and the lanterns flickered. The people gasped as their shadows, long and trembling under the lamplight, began to detach. They rose like smoke leaving fire and dissolved into the air. Then silence. Corvin smiled faintly. "Congratulations, Marin Vale. You have just sold what you no longer needed." The change was immediate. Within days, the old mine was miraculously clear of rubble. A surveyor claimed he'd never seen such solid ground. Within weeks, investors appeared. New machines, new wages, new hope. Children laughed again. Shops reopened. The bells rang with new life, and no one noticed what was missing. No shadows under carts, no silhouettes on walls, no outlines in candlelight. At first, it was amusing. People posed and laughed at their emptiness. But soon, the laughter grew uneasy. Without shadows, the world seemed flat, light too sharp, colors too pale. And at night, when lamps burned low, the air behind each person felt faintly alive, as if something was still there, unseen, watching from the edge of the light. The first to notice was Ellen Price. She was correcting papers. Late one evening, when her lantern dimmed and the room grew colder, she turned, expecting to see her reflection in the window, but there was none. Only the faint outline of movement, like mist breathing against glass. Then came the whisper, "Ellen." She froze. The voice was hers, but older and sad. When she reached to touch the glass, a faint handprint appeared on the other side, perfectly aligned with hers. The next morning, her students said she looked pale, distracted. When she turned to write on the board, one child gasped because her reflection in the window didn't move. By the end of the month, the town had changed. People spoke slower. They forgot things, simple things. Songs sounded dull. Laughter felt rehearsed. It was as if something essential had been drained away. Corvain still stayed at the tavern, always polite, always calm. When Reverend Morgan confronted him, Corvain only smiled. Your town is thriving. You've gained everything you asked for. Why do you mourn what you freely gave? The Reverend's voice trembled. You took their souls. Corvin tilted his head. Souls, no, Reverend. Souls cannot be taken, but reflections. Reflections can be misplaced. Ellen Price began collecting evidence, drawings, notes, and testimonies. She found that every shadow sold had taken something with it. One man lost his sense of taste. Another could no longer dream. A child forgot her mother's face. When she went to Corvin's room to confront him, she found it empty, the bed untouched, the candle never burned down. Only the small book lay open on the desk. Inside, under each name, were faint sketches, black silhouettes, curled like pressed leaves. And in the last page, payment received, balance restored. As she turned the page, she noticed her own name written at the bottom, though she'd never signed it. And beside it, in fresh ink, one single line, shadow pending. The candle blew out, and for a moment, just before the dark swallowed the room, Ellen saw her shadow return to the wall, but it was smiling, and she wasn't. When dawn came to Marinvale now, it was colorless, not gray, not white, just a thin, quiet light that seemed to exist without warmth. It made the world look painted, as if each surface had been washed in ghost water. Ellen Price stood by her classroom window, staring at the playground. Children ran and played, but their movements felt slower. Their laughter echoed, yet it never quite touched the air. She pressed her hand to the glass again, testing. Her reflection blinked half a second too late. It smiled when she didn't. The books on her desk looked older today, the pages slightly yellowed, though she'd dusted them yesterday. She turned one open. Every letter shimmered faintly, as though the ink was still wet. But when she ran her finger over it, it smudged into dust. She closed it quickly. Outside, a bell rang, but its chime was flat, missing its echo. Even sound was beginning to forget itself. At noon, she walked through the square. The fog was gone, but the light felt heavier, like the sky was holding its breath. A small crowd had gathered by the old wishing well. A man, Gareth Bowen, the miners' foreman, was leaning over it, whispering into the stone mouth. When Ellen approached, the others parted uneasily. "Mr. Bowen," she asked softly, "are you all right?" He didn't answer. She touched his shoulder, and he turned, eyes wide, pale, distant. "They're calling," he said. Down there. She frowned. Who's calling? He pointed into the well. There's light under the water. It's theirs. They're trying to come back up. Ellen peered over the edge. The bottom was dark, but yes, something flickered faintly, deep below the ripples. A light too steady to be a reflection. She drew back sharply as the voice came, faint, distorted, rising with the sound of the wind. Gareth, you left us down here. He shuddered and began whispering apologies into the stones. Ellen backed away. When she looked up across the square, she saw Corvin standing in the shadow of the bell tower, watching. That night, the town bell began ringing. No one was in the tower. No one touched the rope. But the bell swung slow and steady, its toll carrying through the valley. The sound was strange, hollow, reversed, as if each chime had already been heard before it began. Windows shook, dogs howled, candles guttered out. Reverend Morgan gathered a few men to climb the tower. Ellen went with them, her lantern trembling in her hand. The staircase was narrow, spiraling upward into dust and old wood. The air smelled of iron and candle soot. Halfway up, she noticed the walls were damp, though it hadn't rained. At the top, the bell was moving on its own, slowly, rhythmically, back and forth. No wind, no hands. And on its surface, where years of patina had dulled the bronze, something new had appeared. A faint pattern, dark and glistening, like shapes burned into metal. They were shadows, human shadows, each frozen in the act of reaching upward. That same night, Ellen stormed into the tavern. Corvin was seated, as always, at the corner table. The small book rested before him, open, a single candle burning beside it. You knew this would happen, she said quietly. Her voice carried more fear than anger. He didn't look up. I know only what balance demands. You call this balance. The people are losing themselves. Corvain lifted his eyes. They glowed faintly in the candlelight, as if reflecting something far brighter than the flame before him. Do you know what happens when a soul clings to its grief for too long, Miss Price? It darkens. It anchors the world in pain. I merely release what humanity cannot bear. Release, she whispered. You've taken their humanity. He smiled, a small, tired curve of lips. Humanity is not lost. It's redistributed. Then he closed the book gently. You, however, are an anomaly. Ellen froze. What do you mean? He rose, slow and deliberate. Your shadow still resists me. It has begun to remember what others have forgotten. I would be careful, Miss Price. It may not remain yours much longer. He walked past her, his coat brushing against her sleeve. No sound, no weight, no warmth, as if he wasn't really there at all. The next day, Ellen visited Mary Cadwell, one of the miner's widows. Mary's home sat at the end of the lane, its windows covered in black cloth, though it was midday. Inside, the air was heavy with candle smoke and lavender. Dozens of candles, all burning at once, though none of them cast shadows. Mary sat at the table, her hands clasped around a photograph. "Do you see them too?" she whispered. Ellen sat opposite. "See what?" Mary pointed at the wall. There, faint and flickering, two shapes stood. One was Mary, seated. The other, a tall man, standing behind her, his hands on her shoulders. Her husband, dead 27 days. "I can hear him breathing when I sleep," she said. "He says he's close. Says I just have to let go of the light a little longer." Ellen's throat tightened. "Mary, that's not him." Tears welled in the widow's eyes. "Then who else would know the lullaby he used to hum while the mine sang below us?" The candles flickered, and the man's shadow smiled. The following week, letters began appearing, folded neatly on doorsteps, tied with black thread. Each bore a name written in a familiar hand, the handwriting of the dead. Inside each, only one line: "We are closer than you think." Some thought it was a cruel prank. Others wept and believed it was mercy. But Ellen noticed something peculiar. Every letter's ink shimmered faintly, like it wasn't written with ink at all, but with shadow. That night, she burned her letter unopened. But as it turned to ash, the smoke formed words that drifted against the wall. "You can't hide from yourself." Ellen's mirror had been covered for days, ever since her reflection started to delay. But now she uncovered it again, candle in hand. The glass looked darker than usual, absorbing light instead of reflecting it. She stared into it. Her reflection blinked normally this time. It even smiled when she did. She exhaled, relief breaking through fear. But then the reflection moved first. It raised its hand before she did, slowly, deliberately, and with its finger, it wrote across the inside of the mirror's surface, as if on misted glass. "He's behind you." Ellen froze. The candle flame wavered, her heart hammered, but she didn't turn. "Corvain," she whispered. The reflection nodded, still smiling. Then it faded, like a painting washed away by rain. She turned. The room was empty. Only the small book lay open on her table, though she de-locked it away the night before, and her name was crossed out. The townspeople began noticing the glow. At night, the hill above the mine shimmered faintly, a dull, pulsing light beneath the earth, like lightning caught in soil. Animals refused to go near it. Men who tried to approach grew dizzy. Their vision split into two, one image of the hill before them, another of it inverted, as though the world had folded in on itself. Ellen climbed it one evening with Reverend Morgan. At the crest, the ground felt warm, breathing. Almost a sound came from below. Not a moan, not a wind, but something rhythmic, like 100 heartbeats pulsing in unison. She knelt and pressed her ear to the ground and heard whispers, thousands of them, whispers of names, prayers, bargains, all overlapping. She sat up sharply. "The shadows," she said, "they're not gone. They're under us." The Reverend's hands trembled around his cross, and Corvain, Ellen looked toward the valley. The tavern's single window glowed faintly red. "He's collecting more than shadows now," she murmured. "He's feeding them." The final night came quietly. No storm, no wind, just stillness. From her window, Ellen saw the townspeople walking, one by one, toward the hill. Each held a candle, each face calm, eyes half closed. Their light formed a line through the fog, a procession of pale fire winding into the earth. Ellen followed, barefoot, clutching her lantern. At the hilltop, Corvain stood waiting, book in hand. The ground below shimmered with soft light, pulsing like the surface of a sleeping creature. He raised his voice, not loud, but clear enough that it seemed to echo inside her skull. "Your time in darkness is over. You have paid your due. Step into the light and be whole." One by one, they obeyed. As each person reached the circle of light, they dissolved into radiance, their shapes turning to silhouettes, then fading entirely. No screams, no pain, just silence. When only Ellen remained, Corvain turned to her. "You are the last shadow, Miss Price. It is time." She shook her head. "What happens when the last shadow is gone?" He smiled. "Then the world forgets it ever needed one." Ellen looked down at the pulsing light. She whispered, "Then it ends," and she ran straight into the glow. When dawn came to Marinvale the next morning, it was brighter than ever. Every roof gleamed, every window shone, birds sang, but no one answered. The streets were empty. The schoolhouse door hung open, its chalkboard still bearing the last line Ellen wrote, "Do not trust the light." In the tavern, the book still sat on the table. Open, every page was blank, except one. Balance restored. The town remembers no shadows. As the wind moved through the room, the candle flame bent backward, and for a moment, on the wall behind it, a faint silhouette appeared, a woman's shape, still watching. Then it vanished, and the light went on shining, beautiful, endless, empty. London, 1961. Rain pooled in the corners of Fleet Street, where the last of the printing presses still rattled like tired lungs. Inside a narrow office smelling of ink and tobacco, Arthur Hensley sat hunched over a stack of newspaper clippings. Each bore the same headline in some variation: "Village vanishes overnight. Shadowless sightings reported in Devon. Light without source baffles investigators." Arthur had been chasing these reports for years. At first, he thought they were local myths, the sort that fill quiet pubs and long nights. But too many patterns lined up. Too many places whispered the same name: Marinvale. He drew a circle around it on the map, the ink bleeding through the paper. A forgotten mining town, vanished in 1953. No survivors. The official cause, land subsidence following a gas explosion. But the photograph's aerial shots, taken months apart, told a different story. The land had sunk inward, yes, but in the night image, the crater glowed faintly, as if lit from within. Arthur stared at it. He didn't know what he was looking for anymore, truth or closure. Maybe both. 3 days later, Arthur arrived at the National Records Repository. The air inside was cold and smelled of old paper. Rows upon rows of shelves towered above him, endless corridors of forgotten history. The archivist on duty was a thin man named Mr. Halden. His face was pale, his voice barely audible, the kind that made every sentence sound like a confession. "I'm looking for files on Marinvale," Arthur said. Halden's hand paused, mid-motion, hovering above a stack of ledgers. "Marinvale," he repeated softly. "That name shouldn't exist anymore." Arthur frowned. "What do you mean?" Halden's eyes darted around the room before he gestured for silence. He led Arthur to a restricted aisle rows of metal drawers, each labeled with towns, parishes, districts, except for one. One drawer was blank. Halden pulled it open. Inside lay a single folder, sealed with red wax. No date, no file code. He broke the seal carefully. Inside were faded photographs, black and white, edges curled. Men without shadows, streets without contrast, children playing under the sun, but no silhouettes touching the ground. At the back of the folder was a letter, typed but unsigned. The phenomenon expands slowly, carried by recollection. Any written or spoken memory of Marinvale must be purged. Do not archive this file under any name. Department of Continuity, 1955. Arthur looked up. "Who are they?" Halden whispered. "The ones who collect what shouldn't be remembered." Arthur carried the file back to his rented room. Rain fell outside again, steady, patient. He pinned the photographs to his wall. That's when he noticed it, a figure appearing faintly in the background of each shot, sometimes near a doorway, sometimes beside a lamppost. Always the same silhouette, tall, coat length to the knee, hat brim low, and always holding something small, a book. Arthur checked the angles. The pattern was deliberate. This wasn't a villager, it was an observer. He looked closer. On one photograph, the light had hit the figure's face just enough to reveal faint features. The same pale eyes, almost silver, the same unreadable calm. Corvain. Arthur felt the air leave his lungs. He stepped back, the room spinning slightly. He'd seen that face before, in a book of urban myths from the 1920s, credited as the Man of the Dim Places, a name used in several towns that later disappeared. He sank into the chair, the sound of rain muffling the edges of reality. If Corvain had been present for decades, then Marinvale wasn't the first, just one of many. Arthur's search led him west. A tip from Halden directed him to a place called Nary's Hollow, a settlement erased from most maps. Locals called it the Hollow Light. He arrived at dusk. The road narrowed into a single lane bordered by pines. Birds flew silently overhead, their wings catching no shadow on the road. The first house appeared half-sunken in fog, its windows boarded. On the door, a painted symbol, 2 circles, one inverted inside the other. Arthur took a photograph. The flash failed. The camera didn't click. When he looked at the lens, the reflection staring back at him wasn't his. He stepped back, heartbeat quickening. Down the road, a small chapel stood crooked against the hill. A bell hung there, broken. He pushed open the door. Inside, and on the wall behind it, dozens of names carved into stone. But every name had been scratched out one by one. At the bottom of the list, faint but untouched, was one final name. Ellen Price. Arthur's camera dropped. His voice barely rose above a whisper. She was real. Back in London, Arthur visited a retired filmmaker named Hugh Carrick, who had once documented rural life across Britain. "I did visit Marinvale once," Carrick said, adjusting his spectacles before it vanished. "Strange place. Everyone smiled too much, even in the rain." He rummaged through reels until he found a tin marked 1952, South Wales. The footage was silent, black and white, grainy. Arthur watched. Children ran through muddy lanes. A bell tower rose in the distance. Then a woman turned toward the camera. Ellen. Her eyes looked directly into the lens, almost knowingly. Her lips moved, forming words that no sound carried. Arthur leaned closer to the projector. The film crackled, the frame jumped, and for a brief second, another figure appeared behind her. Corvain. Then the reel burned. The film melted mid-frame, smoke curling upward like shadow escaping light. Carrick cursed, waving the smoke away. "That's never happened before." Arthur said nothing. He'd already seen enough to know the truth. Corvin wasn't human, and Ellen had tried to warn whoever might find the story next. 2 weeks later, Arthur received an unsigned note at his office. "If you want the truth about Marinvale, meet at the old power station, midnight." He went. The power station loomed like a dead cathedral, its windows shattered, rain leaking through its bones. Inside, a single lamp flickered near the control panel. A woman stood there, late 50s, stern eyes, cigarette trembling slightly in her hand. "I'm Dr. Ada Varon, Department of Continuity," she said. Arthur didn't speak, he just nodded. "You've been looking where we buried too many truths," she continued. "Corvain was not the first. There have been others, entities that feed on the weight of remembrance. The moment something becomes legend, they arrive to cleanse it. Balance, they call it." Arthur frowned. "Cleanse. They erase what the world can't carry: grief, regret, guilt. They take it from us at a cost. And Marinvale, she exploded slowly, a town too full of sorrow. The disaster made it a beacon. Corvain came to collect what pain had gathered there. He harvested their shadows because they were heavy with memory. Arthur's throat tightened, and you just let him. Ada looked away. We didn't have a choice. Every attempt to interfere made the phenomenon spread faster. Memory amplifies it. Even speaking his name gives it shape. Arthur stared at her. Then why tell me? She handed him a small black envelope. Because it's happening again. In France, a town called Saint-Eloy. If someone doesn't stop it this time, there'll be no shadows left to hide in. When he looked down, the envelope was gone. So was she. Arthur's notes filled 2 notebooks by now. He pieced together timelines, testimonies, symbols. He decided to do what journalists do best: tell the story. He arranged a late-night radio broadcast on the London Underground frequency, a quiet channel few listened to anymore. He read everything he'd discovered: the shadows, the letters, the names. Halfway through, the sound began to distort. A low hum crept under his voice. Then silence. He tapped the mic. Hello. The room's lights flickered. In the reflection of the glass booth, a tall figure stood behind him. Corvin. Arthur froze. Corvin's voice came softly, like silk sliding through static. You shouldn't have remembered. The broadcast continued, though Arthur never spoke again. Listeners across the city heard the same thing: a deep, rhythmic pulse, followed by a whisper of thousands of names overlapping. When authorities found the booth, it was empty. Only the microphone remained, still recording. On the tape, faintly, just before the end, balance restored. A month later, the London Gazette received a parcel with no return address. Inside were Arthur's notebooks, neatly bound, each page filled with careful handwriting, diagrams, sketches, transcripts. On the last page, one line stood alone. Every story told keeps the light alive. Tell this one carefully. Attached to it was a photograph. Marinvale, whole again. Children playing. Shadows returned. But in the bottom corner of the image, a faint outline. A tall man in a coat, walking away into the brightness. In a government archive, somewhere beneath London, a new file was placed into storage. The clerk wrote the label by hand. Operation Collector, resolved. As he slid it into the drawer, a second folder, blank, newly appeared, shifted slightly beside it. Curious, he opened it. Inside was a photograph of him, sitting at the desk, writing the label he had just written. And on the back of the photograph, a note: do not archive this under any name. The lights flickered. Somewhere deep in the building, a bell began to ring. Midnight, a radio hums in an empty newsroom. No one is there, yet the microphone remains open. From within the static, A whisper begins, calm, patient, almost kind. This is not the end. The shadows, remember, they always do. The sound fades, the radio clicks off, and across the dark city, for one brief second, every streetlight flickers, casting a shadow that doesn't belong to anyone. The morning after the pact, the town awoke to a silence that was not silence at all, but a pause, like the world waiting for its next line. The crows didn't call, the wind didn't sigh. Even the coal carts in the far hills seemed to glide soundlessly over their rails. Harland was the first to notice. He stepped outside his door and blinked into the gray morning. The light was sharp, thin, and something about it felt wrong. He looked down to find his boots, the soil, the fence, all there, but not the shadow of himself. He stared at the spot where it should have been, where every morning his silhouette had lain across the path to the well. His heart thudded. He lifted a hand, then another. Nothing, just the ground, still and pale. He called for his wife Idra. Idra, come look at this. She appeared at the doorway, still in her nightdress, face drawn. You too. The words stopped him cold. She raised her arm. It cast no shade. For a long while they said nothing. Only the ticking of the kitchen clock dared to speak. By mid-morning the streets of Quemgil were filled with murmurs and fear. Dozens of villagers stood out under the pale sun, testing themselves, waving, spinning, stepping back and forth as if trying to find an angle where the shadow might reappear. None succeeded. Father Marin knelt outside the chapel, pressing his hand against the stone cross that should have cast a line across the grass. He whispered prayers, half to God, half to something else. Maybe it's the fog, said a miner named Iwan. There's no fog, replied another, just the light. Look at it. It's too white. Someone called from the end of the lane, the stranger. Find the stranger. They found him sitting by the edge of the quarry road, just where the mist touched the forest. He had not moved since the night before. The same black coat, the same gloved hands folded neatly over his knees. His face was unreadable, like marble faintly warmed by sunlight. When Harland and the others approached, he looked up with the calm of a man who'd been expecting them. Good morning, he said softly. You've slept well, I hope. Harland's throat was dry. What did you do to us? The stranger tilted his head slightly. I did only what I promised. You gave something you no longer needed in exchange for all that you desired. And now the work begins. The work, Marin barked. You call this work. Look at us. He gestured to his own feet, where even the hem of his robe hung in light without reflection. No shadows, not a single one in the whole valley. Yes, said the stranger, almost kindly. It's beautiful, isn't it? They tried to confront him further, but the man's words carried a quiet gravity, like a dream's logic that could not be reasoned with. He explained nothing more. only smiled, rising slowly. "As you live in the light," he said, "remember that what you've lost was not taken, it was set free. The shadow is burden. The shadow remembers every wound, every sin, every cruel thought. You are lighter now. You are pure." He began walking toward the forest, and though Harland called after him, his voice felt muffled, distant. By the time the stranger reached the edge of the trees, the light seemed to fold around him, and then he was gone. That evening, as dusk came, something stranger still occurred. There was no dusk. The sun sank as usual, but the sky did not darken. It remained the same pale silver as morning, the same dull brightness that offered no warmth and no shadow. Candles barely flickered, as though they burned in a world that no longer believed in night. Children laughed at first, running through the streets, shouting, "It's still day, it's still day." But their laughter thinned as the hours stretched on. Sleep refused to come. The crickets were silent. The lamps along the road burned without need. And somewhere deep in that unending daylight, something unseen began to stir. 2 days later, Harland noticed Edra humming a tune she'd never sung before, a slow, hollow lullaby that seemed to have no melody. When he asked her where she'd learned it, she blinked as if she hadn't heard him at all. At the storehouse, men spoke in low voices about the change. They said they no longer felt hunger or tiredness. Their wounds from the mines healed overnight. A few joked that they were becoming saints. But there was an unease behind their smiles. A child named Ruth wandered to the edge of the forest, claiming she'd seen her shadow walking without her, a flat shape gliding along the tree line, waving before vanishing. Her mother scolded her for making up stories. Yet that night, Ruth vanished too. By the 5th day, Quumgil had changed beyond recognition. The fields grew thick and green. The livestock multiplied. The air itself smelled of iron and clean stone. And yet the people were fading, not in body, but in being. The teacher, Nora Wynne, wrote in her journal, "Their eyes are dull. They do not laugh, nor quarrel, nor sing. Even grief has left them. It is as if someone took a knife to their hearts and trimmed away everything human. I think the shadows carried our souls away." She became the only one still writing, still questioning. On the 7th morning, she went to the quarry alone. The mist there was thicker than ever, and she could feel something inside it breathing. From the fog came a faint echo of footsteps and a voice she recognized. "Miss Wynne," it said. The stranger emerged once more, though this time his coat seemed heavier, his face older. He regarded her with faint curiosity. "You haven't changed like the others," he said. "Still thinking, still doubting. That makes you rare." Nora's hands trembled. "What are you? Why us?" The man looked past her toward the town, now bathed in ghostly light, because this place was already hollow. "I only showed it the truth You all lived like shadows, long before I came. Where did our shadows go? She asked. He smiled, faint and slow. Where all forgotten things go, to memories, underside. Perhaps you'll meet them one day, when the light grows too bright to bear. And then he reached into his pocket, drew out a single black feather, and placed it on the ground between them. For now, he whispered, keep this. It may remind you what darkness was for. That night, Nora dreamed of a well with no bottom, filled with the voices of those who once had faces. They whispered her name, not in fear, but in longing. And when she awoke, she found something impossible, a thin, trembling shadow beneath her feet. It moved as she breathed. It waited as she stood. And she realized, with cold clarity, that it was not hers alone. By the 8th day, sleep had become a myth in Quamgil. Beds lay untouched, curtains remained open, and candles burned down to pools of wax. The light, pale and even, neither day nor night, hung above the town like a fever that would not break. Nora Wynne sat at her desk in the schoolhouse, her journal open, pages crowded with uneven handwriting. The ink shimmered faintly, as though the page itself resisted being written upon in this new, constant daylight. Outside, children played in silence. No laughter, no shouting. Only the soft scuff of their bare feet on the dustless ground. Their movements were too precise, too synchronized. Nora rose, stepped to the window, and watched them closely. They were tracing circles in the dirt, perfect circles, dozens of them, each one drawn exactly the same size, the same spacing. She went outside, calling gently, Ruth, Evan, Lila. But the children didn't stop. Their heads turned in unison, eyes blank and glassy, and then they began to hum. It wasn't a tune. It was a vibration, low and deep, almost mechanical. The sound pressed against her ribs, made the air tremble. The same strange tone she'd heard faintly at night when the town first lost its shadows. Her heart pounded. What are you doing? No one answered. The circles grew darker, as if something beneath the ground was responding. Later that day, Harland came to the schoolhouse, his face hollow. They're not ours anymore, he said quietly. The children, they don't sleep, don't speak, don't even cry. My boy just sits at the window, humming that tune until morning. Nora closed her journal. It's not music, she said. It's a signal. He frowned. A signal to what? She hesitated. To whoever took their shadows, or maybe to what's left of them. The two of them went door to door that evening. Every home was the same. Parents wide-eyed and numb, children still humming, the air thick with static. One mother said she'd tried to shake her daughter awake, but the child only stared, whispering a phrase in Welsh that none could translate. Myr Galawan Cofio. Nora gathered the remaining adults in the chapel, where Father Marin still kept his silent vigil. before the crucifix. He was pale, gaunt, his lips moving constantly in prayer. When she told him about the humming, his eyes flickered with faint recognition. "The shadows," he murmured. "They're learning to speak without mouths." Nora slammed her hand on the pew. "Enough riddles, Father. We need truth, not sermons." He turned to her slowly, and for the first time, she saw the faint shimmer around his feet, a faint distortion, like heat rising from the floor. "You've seen it too," she said. He nodded. "My shadow came back last night, but it's wrong. It doesn't move as I do. Sometimes, when I turn, it hesitates, as if it's listening to something behind me." That night, Nora returned home and found the black feather the stranger had given her still lying on her desk. She picked it up, holding it against the endless light. It shimmered faintly, absorbing, not reflecting. The only piece of true darkness left in Quamgil. She set it on the floor, and as she watched, her small shadow seemed to stretch toward it alive, trembling. It was as though it recognized the feather. Then, for the briefest instant, she heard whispers rise from the walls, not loud, just soft enough to be mistaken for breath. "The children dream for you now." She turned sharply, but there was no one. The next morning, the humming spread, not just children, but adults too. The sound rolled through the streets like an invisible tide, each voice layered upon the next, until the whole town seemed to throb in rhythm. The sound grew stronger near the mine, the same mine that had collapsed weeks before the stranger's arrival. Harland and Nora went there together, following the vibration down the path. Birds fled the trees as they passed. When they reached the mine entrance, the air pulsed with energy. The wooden beams of the tunnel shuddered faintly, as if breathing. They stepped inside. The mine was not as they remembered it. The walls gleamed faintly, the rock smooth as glass, black as the feather, and deep within, a light shimmered, soft and golden, like sunlight trapped underwater. From the darkness came voices, faint echoes of laughter, crying, whispers. "Do you hear that?" Harlan said, his voice shaking. "Yes," Nora whispered. "It's them." They followed the sound deeper until they reached a wide cavern. There they saw dozens, maybe hundreds of shapes moving along the walls, shadows. They rippled like smoke, flickering in and out of existence, mimicking human gestures. Each one seemed attached to no one, searching, crawling, reaching toward the sound above. And at the center of the cavern stood the stranger. He looked different now, taller, or perhaps simply more defined. His coat rippled like liquid darkness. "I wondered how long it would take," he said softly. "Your curiosity always did run deeper than fear." Nora stepped forward. "What have you done to them?" "Nothing they did not invite," he said. "They begged for light, and so I gave it to them. Now their shadows wait below, hungry to return, but they cannot. Not while the sun still refuses to set. She held up the feather. You said this would remind me what darkness was for. He smiled faintly. And has it? It's shown me you're lying, she said. The stranger's eyes gleamed, and for a heartbeat the cavern seemed to twist, the shadows stretching like tendrils toward her. You think light is mercy, he said. But mercy burns, only shadow cools, only shadow remembers. Harland drew a rusted pickaxe from the tunnel wall and raised it, but the stranger didn't move. Strike if you wish, he murmured. But remember, a man without a shadow cannot harm what exists between light and dark. Harland swung anyway. The pickaxe passed through him like smoke, and the echo of the strike rang out as if from miles away. The stranger's form flickered, his outline bent, wavered, and then, suddenly, he was too. A second figure stepped forward from his own silhouette, identical in every feature, except its eyes, which glowed white. Do you see? Said the stranger. You're learning what divides you. The two shadows circled each other like dancers, their forms merging, separating, whispering in unison. Nora stumbled backward, clutching the feather. Its edges burned cold in her palm. And then, from the cavern walls, a single child's voice called out, faint but clear, Miss Wynne. She froze. Ruth. From the shadows, a small figure emerged, not flesh but shape, a perfect outline of Ruth, her voice trembling. We're not gone. We're just waiting for the dark to come back. Nora fell to her knees. How do we bring it back? The shadow girl raised her hands, pointing to the feather. It's the last piece. Break it, and night will return. But you'll never see light again. Nora looked at Harland. He stared at her, silent, as if weighing what the town had become. Its hollow calm, its soulless peace. She lifted the feather high. It shimmered once, then snapped. The world shuddered. The pale light fractured into 1,000 pieces, breaking like glass. The hum stopped. The endless day folded into itself, and for the first time in more than a week, night fell. Real night, thick, soft, alive. The shadows surged upward, flooding back to their owners, reuniting with a sound like breath after drowning. But when Nora looked around, Harland was gone. Only his shadow remained, standing upright, watching her. She returned to the surface alone. The stars glittered like cold tears above Quamgil. The town was silent once more, but not peaceful. As she walked home, her shadow trailed faithfully behind her again. Yet, as she reached her door, she saw something that made her stop. Her shadow smiled, Quamgil slept for the first time in what felt like eternity. The night blanketed the valley like an old, forgiving hand. But forgiveness has weight, and it fell heavily. When dawn came, it was no longer the white, unending glare. It was soft, blue-gray, honest. The villagers woke to birdsong, and the smell of wet earth, their eyes sunken, their movements hesitant, like people waking from a dream too long to remember. Nora Wynne stood by her window, her reflection faint in the glass. The feather she had broken was gone, yet its ash still marked her palm. A small black crescent burned into her skin. Her shadow lay quietly at her feet, long and ordinary again, almost ordinary. It moved when she moved, yes, but with the faintest delay, a heartbeat behind her. And sometimes, when she turned too fast, she could swear it was still smiling. The town began to return to routine, though the word routine no longer meant the same. Miners went back to the shafts, muttering prayers before entering. The church reopened, though Father Marin's sermons had turned strange, filled with long silences and questions instead of answers. And the children, the ones who had hummed in circles, no longer sang, but often stared at corners of the room, as if listening to someone only they could hear. Harland was still missing. His home was untouched, his tools laid out neatly, his bed unslept in. Nora checked it every morning and every night. His shadow, however, had been seen wandering. People whispered that it appeared in doorways at dusk, pausing as if it remembered what doors were for. Nora's journal entries grew shorter. The night has weight again, but the air is strange, heavy, thick, like something still hiding beneath it. Sometimes I think the light didn't leave, it just moved inside us. She found herself drawn back to the mine. Each day she promised she wouldn't go, and each night she ended up at its mouth again, staring into the blackness that seemed to breathe faintly. Once she swore she heard the stranger's voice, faint, low, like an echo from water. Every shadow smiles when it knows its master. 3 nights after the return of darkness, Father Marin came to her door. He looked pale, haunted. "You've seen it too," he said, before she could speak. Nora frowned. "Seen what?" He lifted his hand. "The reflections." She blinked. "Reflections." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "They don't match us anymore." "Not exactly. Look in your mirror, you'll understand." She hesitated, then turned toward the mirror near her writing desk. Her reflection looked back, tired eyes, drawn cheeks, ink-stained fingers, and then the reflection smiled. She hadn't. Nora stumbled back, hand over her mouth. The reflection kept smiling for a moment longer, then returned to normal. Father Marin's breathing quickened, mine too. It began this morning. I think the shadows brought something back with them, something that watches through us. He took off his gloves. His hands were trembling. When I hold a candle close, my shadow wavers, as if it's breathing on its own. Nora sat down heavily. Then we haven't ended it. We've only changed it. Marin nodded. The man, the stranger, he didn't give us a curse. He gave us a choice. We wanted our darkness back, and now it's learning how to use us. That night, Nora dreamt of Harland. He stood in the mine, his face pale, his eyes full of that same dull light that once filled the endless days. "You shouldn't have broken the feather," he whispered. "The shadows weren't trapped, they were hiding. You freed them." She tried to speak, but her voice didn't work. Instead, she watched as Harlan's shadow detached itself, slowly peeling away from him like wet cloth, and crawled toward her. It reached for her ankle. It smiled. Nora woke with a scream, the candle beside her bed flickering wildly. Her shadow rippled across the floor, wrong in its rhythm. When she stood, it didn't stand. When she moved, it lagged, then snapped suddenly to match. A low sound began in the walls, not humming this time, but a quiet pulse, as if a vast heart had begun to beat beneath the earth. She stepped toward the door, whispering, "Who's there?" The voice that answered came not from outside, but from behind her. "Your shadow knows." Over the next few days, the entire town began to feel it. The small, wrong details, shadows twitching out of rhythm, mirrors smiling, doors that stayed open even when latched. The villagers avoided speaking of it, but all of them had seen something, a flicker, a grin, a movement in their periphery. Father Marin called it the second dusk. He believed the shadows had grown too strong, too self-aware, feeding on the terror that came with their return. The town's longing for normalcy had given them power. Nora's journal became frantic. The shadow is patient. It watches until I sleep. Sometimes I hear it whisper through my teeth, words I don't understand. It wants something from me, something more than form. She decided to confront it. On the 7th night, she lit every candle in her house, filling the room with dancing light. The air shimmered with gold. Her shadow stretched across the floor, flickering faintly. Nora spoke softly. "What are you?" For a long time, it said nothing. Then, slowly, its head tilted upward. Its lips moved. Hers did not. "You left us there." Her throat tightened. "Where?" "In the light." Its voice was like wind through a hollow tree. "We waited for the dark to take us back, but it took you instead. You don't belong to night or day now. You belong to what remembers both." The room grew cold. The candles dimmed one by one. Nora whispered, "What do you want? To be seen?" And then the shadow smiled again. The next morning, Father Marin was found in the chapel, kneeling before the altar. His shadow was gone entirely. Only a faint black handprint remained on the stone floor before him, pressed there as if something had tried to rise. Nora, trembling, packed her journals and left her home. She walked to the mine one last time, the air thick with the echo of that unseen heartbeat. She stopped at the edge, looking down into the abyss. The darkness there was no longer empty. It pulsed, faintly glowing with lines that moved like veins. Her shadow stretched ahead of her, reaching into the pit. For a moment, she thought she saw others waiting their hundreds, maybe thousands of figures smiling up from below. She whispered, "What happens if I go down?" Her shadow turned toward her and whispered back, perfectly synchronized, "Then you'll finally be whole." That night, a storm swept over Quamgil. Lightning struck the mine 3 times, and the valley filled with fire and ash. When the villagers came to look the next morning, they found no trace of Nora Wynne. Only her journal open on the rocks, the ink washed into long black trails. Her final entry read, "There are 2 kinds of light, the one that shows and the one that remembers. I think we live in the second now." When the sun rose, every shadow in Quamgil smiled. The storm that consumed Quamgil faded by dawn, leaving the valley draped in gray mist and the faint scent of iron. For weeks afterward, no one went near. Travelers on the main road claimed the air around the town shimmered, like heat rising from stone, though it was winter and cold enough to crack glass. Then came Inspector Alan Reese, a man who did not believe in ghosts, but believed in evidence. He'd been sent from Cardiff by the Home Office to investigate the mass disappearance of an entire Welsh mining community. A story, as the papers framed it, too strange to print without ridicule. He arrived alone, carrying 2 bags, one filled with notebooks and lanterns, the other with small bottles of whiskey, because even skeptics know that the dark can weigh heavy on the mind. When Reese reached the town limits, the sign that read Quamgil Est 1884 was half buried in ash. No birds sang, no dogs barked, and yet, faintly, he heard something, a low vibration, like a hum beneath the earth. He paused, listening. It came in slow waves, almost rhythmic. He thought of breathing. The cottages stood empty but intact, doors unlocked, tables still set, candles melted to nubs, everything preserved, as if everyone had simply stepped out mid-sentence. He entered the first home, notebook in hand. Observation number 1. No sign of struggle, no decay. Dust layer indicates time stopped or refused to settle. The clock on the mantel still ticked. It was impossible, he wrote. Clock wound and functional. Must investigate mechanism, likely residual motion. But when he placed his ear near the clock, the ticking changed from tick to whisper. Just one word. Wait. Reese dropped it immediately. By nightfall, he had explored half the village. Each home mirrored the last. A life interrupted. A meal left half-eaten. A book open to the middle of a chapter. And everywhere, mirrors turned face down, as if someone had gone through each room deliberately to cover them. He didn't notice the first strange thing until he lit his lantern. His shadow stretched long against the wall, and then, as he moved, it didn't follow exactly. It lingered. At the inn, he set up his base. 1 room, 1 desk, 1 bottle. he began cataloging his notes, labeling each page: phenomenon, evidence, anomalies. On the third page, he found handwriting that wasn't his. "Do not trust the light." He froze. The ink was wet. He checked the door. Locked. He checked the windows. Closed. Then he looked at the lantern. The flame flickered blue for a moment, then steadied. He closed the notebook and poured himself another drink. The next morning, Reese found a path leading to the mine. A charred sign lay nearby, blackened by lightning, still smelling faintly of ozone. He hesitated at the entrance, shining his flashlight inward. The beam seemed to bend, swallowed by the dark before it reached the first bend. Something about it made his teeth ache, a pressure, subtle and insistent, as though the air itself hummed inside his skull. He took a breath, then entered. The tunnel was dry, too dry. No dust, no dripping water, no trace of decay. The deeper he went, the more the walls gleamed, smooth, glass-like, almost polished. He marked them with chalk, but the marks faded within seconds. When he reached a wide chamber, he saw something carved into the stone. Letters, uneven, desperate. The light remembers. He traced the grooves with his glove. The letters pulsed faintly, like veins. Something shifted behind him. He turned sharply, flashlight raised, and there against the far wall stood a man. "Hello," Reese called out. No answer. The man was still, his clothes torn, face obscured by shadow. "Are you hurt?" Reese stepped closer. "I'm with the constabulary." The man moved his head slightly. The motion was strange, delayed, like a puppet tugged on a loose string. Then Reese saw his face. It was Harlan, the miner from the old reports. But his eyes were hollow, black, glassy, reflecting nothing. "Where are the others?" Reese asked. Harlan smiled, slowly, wrongly. "We came back twice." Reese frowned. "What do you mean?" Before he could finish, Harlan's shadow peeled away from the wall, separating like a second body made of smoke. It moved toward Reese, not crawling, but flowing, and as it neared, the lantern's light dimmed until the chamber was nothing but gray blur and sound. Then a voice, Nora Wynn's voice, whispered near his ear, "Don't follow the smiles." The shadow stopped inches from him, then collapsed into the floor, vanishing. When the light returned, Harlan was gone. Reese stumbled out of the mine by dusk, covered in cold sweat. He fell to his knees, gasping for air that felt too thick to breathe. Behind him, from deep in the mine, came faint laughter, not cruel, not joyous, just human. He ran back to the inn, slammed the door, and began reading every piece of paper left behind. That's when he found Nora Wynn's journals. There were 7 in total, stacked neatly on the desk. The ink had faded in places, smeared by rain, but the last page was legible. There are 2 kinds of light, the one that shows and the one that remembers. He read every line, every fragment, piecing together the story, the stranger, the bargain, the loss of shadows, the return of night. And then he found something that froze him completely. A note tucked between the last pages, written in a different hand. To whoever finds this, if your shadow smiles before you do, leave before it learns your name. Reese stared at it for a long time. Then, slowly, he looked down at the floor. His shadow sat still, but its mouth curved upward. That night, he dreamed of Cardiff, the noise, the lights, the faces of people who never looked up, and in the reflection of a shop window, he saw himself walking past, but behind him, a second shape followed. When he woke, the candle beside him had burned down completely. On the wall, faint but unmistakable, were two shadows. By the time the rescue team arrived from the city a week later, they found the town empty once more. Only Reese's notebook remained, lying open on the table. His final entry read, "Quumgill is not gone. It's waiting to be remembered." Every town begins with a shadow. When they carried the notebook into daylight, the words on the last page began to fade, one by one, until only a faint outline remained, like something refusing to stay in the sun. And as the men loaded their trucks and turned back toward Cardiff, one of them looked down at the dirt beside him. For just a second, he thought he saw his own shadow smiling. The file arrived at Cardiff Central Police Station 3 weeks after Inspector Reese vanished. No return address, no fingerprints, just an envelope sealed with wax, marked only by a single word pressed into the red surface. "Remember." Chief Superintendent Halden tore it open, expecting another prank from one of the tabloids. But inside was a battered notebook, edges blackened by ash. Reese's handwriting filled the first few pages, meticulous, tight, and increasingly erratic. Day 1 arrival. Town silent, atmosphere dense, possible gas exposure or mass hysteria. Day 5, shadows move differently in certain angles of light. Day 9, the people came back, only quieter. By page 12, the sentences fractured. By page 15, the ink changed direction, written sideways, as if the writer had been turning the notebook around, confused by where the words began and ended. Halden closed it, uneasy. Get it to the archives. No press. He turned away from the window, unaware that his own shadow, stretched long across the desk, stayed still, half a second too long, before following him. Cardiff, February 1965. The mornings were gray, the rain never fully stopping. But lately, people whispered of the mirrors. At first, it was only small things, reflections that blinked out of sync, or smiled too long, or lagged behind when someone turned their head. Then came reports of vanishing shadows, a child's silhouette that didn't follow her down the hallway, a lamplighter whose shadow flickered like a candle and then was gone entirely. By March, the city newspapers stopped printing the stories altogether. Not because they didn't believe, but because too many of their typesetters refused to work the night shift. Her name was Evelyn Carter, the department's youngest archivist, 31, meticulous, fond of silence. It was she who was tasked with cataloging Reese's file. She opened the notebook only under daylight, keeping the blinds drawn wide, her hands gloved to avoid contaminating the evidence. But still, when she touched the last page, a faint static hum passed through her fingers, like a radio tuning between stations. The words shifted slightly, not gone, but softening at the edges, as though the paper itself were exhaling. She leaned closer, and for just a moment, she thought she saw something in the ink, not reflection, but depth, like looking into a window rather than at it. That night, Evelyn dreamed of a valley blanketed in fog, where a man stood beneath a crooked sign, CWMGILLS 1884. He turned toward her, half his face still in shadow. "Tell them the light remembers." She waked, gasping, the sound of rain steady outside. Her bedside lamp flickered twice before dying. In the corner of the room, her shadow stood faint but smiling. By April, the phenomenon spread. Streetlights flickered in patterns too rhythmic to be electrical faults. Shop windows developed faint smears that wouldn't wipe away smears, that, under certain angles, resembled handprints from the inside. And at King's Docks, 2 night workers reported seeing their own silhouettes move into the water before they did. The city dismissed it all as mass delusion, but Evelyn knew better. Every night, she read more of Reese's writings, cross-referencing each strange occurrence with his notes from Quomgill. Patterns emerged, light frequencies, mirror angles, even the timing of dusk. Reese had written one line 3 times, underlined twice. It starts when people stop looking at the ground. One night, while filing evidence from another case, Evelyn noticed something odd. The police radio crackled to life on its own. A low hum filled the air, the same rhythmic vibration Reese had described in his first entry. Then, faintly, came a voice. "This is Inspector Alan Reese. If anyone hears this, leave the lights on." Static, then silence. She checked the signal log. The last transmission on that frequency had been decommissioned 8 years ago. The sound repeated again, faintly warped. This time, the message was different. The light remembers, but it does not forgive. The bulbs above her flickered once, then burst, showering the desk in glass. In the dark, she saw her reflection in a framed photograph of the department's founding officers. She wasn't smiling, but the reflection was. 2 days later, a man appeared at the records office, asking for the file from the forgotten town. Tall, rain-soaked voice, soft but deliberate. He introduced himself as Mr. Harrow, claiming to be with the Ministry of Reconstruction, an office Evelyn had never heard of. He presented identification, but the seal looked wrong. "Inspector Reese was my partner," he said. "He sent me ahead." "You've read his reports?" Evelyn nodded cautiously. "Good. Then you understand. There's something in the light, something that learns." Before she could ask what he meant, he looked over her shoulder toward the nearest lamp. The filament inside pulsed like a heartbeat. Harrow's expression hardened. "You've already seen it, haven't you?" She didn't answer. He left without another word. Later that evening, she checked the building's visitor logs. No entry for Mr. Harrow, no footprints in the rain. But in the corridor where he had stood, the bulbs above were still glowing faintly blue. Evelyn's obsession grew. She found herself avoiding mirrors, drawing the curtains tight, moving through her flat with a small pocket lantern instead of the overhead light. One afternoon, she retrieved an unmarked box from the archives labeled simply Quemgil Visual Evidence. Inside, a 16mm reel. She threaded it into the department's projector and began to watch. The footage was grainy, showing miners descending into the shaft, laughing, singing. Then, mid-reel, the film stuttered, the same frame repeated, the miners turning, looking up toward the camera. All of them stopped smiling at once. Their shadows began to move independently. And then, just before the reel snapped, the image froze on a single frame. Inspector Reese standing in front of the mine entrance, his shadow twice the height of his body. The film caught fire. Evelyn threw a cloth over it, coughing from the smoke. When she turned back to the wall, the projection light was still running, but the image remained. It wasn't film anymore. It was moving, faintly breathing, as though the wall remembered what had once been there. That night, the city lost power. Streetlights died one by one. Windows glowed for seconds, then went black. Evelyn watched from her balcony as the city dimmed each district like a candle snuffed in sequence. From the distance, it almost looked like something moving beneath the streets, swallowing the light as it went. Her radio clicked on again, unprompted. The voice Rhesus whispered, "It's looking through them now." She turned off the radio, heart pounding. Then, faintly, she saw her own shadow on the wall. It tilted its head the other way. By dawn, the entire south of Cardiff was under emergency alert. Officials claimed a power grid malfunction, but Evelyn saw the truth. The city's light wasn't gone. It was being stored, drawn inward, collected, remembered, and deep beneath the National Archives building, where the oldest files were kept. She heard that same low vibration Reese had described. It was humming through the walls, pulsing with rhythm, like breath through stone. She followed it to the basement, past rows of forgotten records and dust-choked shelves. At the far end stood a mirror, full length, draped in cloth. She hesitated, then pulled the cover away. The glass rippled once, like disturbed water. Behind her reflection stood a crowd of faces, men, women, miners, all faint, all watching. At their center was Reese. "You found it," he said softly. "Now it will remember you too." The light behind her flickered violently. Then everything went dark. Days later, the city restored partial power. The archives reopened. Evelyn's workspace was untouched, except for one thing. Her notebook lay open, a new page added in handwriting that was not hers. They came back twice, the first time to see, the second time to be seen. Below it, faintly pressed into the paper, the imprint of a smile. That evening, the chief superintendent left his office after midnight. As he passed the corridor lined with glass doors, he caught a glimpse of his reflection. It was standing still. Then, as he turned away, it raised its hand and waved goodbye. At first, the newspapers called it the Great Eclipse, a strange dimming of daylight that wasn't total, but lingering like the sun had grown tired. But soon, scientists realized the truth. There was no eclipse. The sun's light was reaching Earth perfectly fine. It was Earth that had stopped remembering it. The phenomenon began on a Thursday. Across Europe, dawn came 30 minutes late, then an hour, then 2. By the time daylight finally broke, it was dull, gray, and heavy, the kind of light that made every reflection seem slower than its source. Cameras malfunctioned. Film reels refused to capture motion correctly. Faces blurred when recorded. And wherever light gathered, glass, mirrors, water, faint shapes began to move independently of the world around them. The first official report came from a pilot over the North Sea, his voice shaken. "The sun's there, I can see it, but it's like it's shining somewhere else." Back in Cardiff, the National Archives was sealed off by the government. A containment breach, they said, but those who worked there whispered a different story, that something was breathing through the walls, and that every reflective surface had been removed or shattered. Inside the cordoned zone, only one light remained, a single lamp illuminating a desk where Evelyn Carter's last journal was found. The ink was faint, as if the words had resisted being written. Reese was right. The light isn't just illumination, it's memory. It keeps what it touches. Now it's keeping too much. The last line ended abruptly, as though the pen had been pulled from her hand mid-stroke. No one ever saw her again. 2 weeks later, the BBC received an audio recording with no sender, dated August 11th, 1965, the night of the blackout. The voice on the tape was unmistakable. Inspector Alan Reese. "This isn't light anymore. It's recollection. Every photon remembers what it's touched, what it's seen, who's looked into it. And now it's begun to show what it remembers. Static. Then, when we looked into the dark, it looked back and learned the shape of our gaze. Don't turn on the lights. Don't record. Don't photograph. The more you remember it, the more it exists. Then silence. And beneath that silence, If the tape was slowed down, a faint chorus of voices murmuring the same phrase again and again. We came back twice. In London, a freelance photographer named Michael Dare was hired by a newspaper to document the phenomenon. He carried a Rolleiflex, heavy and reliable mechanical, untouched by electricity. On the first day, his photographs came out perfect. Streets, faces, lamplight, all as they should be. On the second day, his negatives developed blank, and on the third, something appeared on the inside of his lens. Faint fingerprints, smudges that shifted positions between shots. He tried to clean them. They didn't move. When he pointed the camera toward the Thames, he saw through the viewfinder a city that wasn't there. Cardiff's skyline, drowned in mist, and a figure standing in the middle distance, holding a lantern that burned blue. When he lowered the camera, the river was empty. He stopped taking photos after that. But 1 week later, his studio windows began to fog every night from the inside, each pane bearing the outline of a hand pressed against it. On October 2nd, 1965, an astronomer from Oslo University sent a letter to the Royal Society in London. "There's a delay between light and shadow now," he wrote. "When I wave my hand, my shadow follows 1 second later. The delay increases each day. By December, the delay reached 10 seconds. People began to report feeling pulled backward when stepping into sunlight, as though something unseen were trying to align them with where they had been, not where they were. Children's reflections laughed before they did. Dogs refused to cross illuminated streets, and in every major city, murals began appearing on walls, faint outlines of faces, eyes closed, burned into brick, as though by sunlight, remembering what it had once touched. January 3rd, 1966. At 7:42 p.m., every television channel in Britain cut to static simultaneously. Then a black and white image faded in. A woman sitting at a desk, Evelyn Carter, her face pale, unmoving, her eyes fixed on the camera. "If you can see me, it means you're part of it now." Behind her, something like liquid shadow moved slowly across the wall, forming faint silhouettes of people standing still. "This is what the light remembers," she said. "And soon, this is all it will be." The screen flickered once, then her expression changed just slightly. She smiled, but her lips didn't move. Only the reflection in her eyes smiled. The broadcast ended. The BBC denied it ever happened. By spring, the sky cleared briefly. For the first time in months, sunlight returned, bright, sharp, beautiful. People filled the streets, laughing, embracing, taking photographs. But when the films developed, the images were all the same. Each showed different people, unfamiliar faces, standing in the same positions, wearing the same clothes. In one, a man appeared twice, once in the foreground, once in the background, looking at himself. In another, a child's reflection in a puddle showed her 20 years older. Governments banned photography for public safety, but it was too late. The phenomenon wasn't in the sky anymore. It was in memory itself. In 1971, deep under an unmarked facility near Brecon Beacons, a secret research division, codename Project Talos, compiled every record, every film, every tape linked to the Cardiff incident. The lead scientist, Dr. Marianne Hollow, recorded her observations privately. The Quamgill anomaly is mimetic, not infectious in the biological sense, but psychological. Exposure to light that has once remembered the event alters human perception. We're not being haunted, we're being remembered. Her final log, the memory has started to form its own geography. Places where no sunlight falls are becoming thin. 2 days later, the entire facility lost power. When teams re-entered, they found all light fixtures fused into the ceiling. Glass melted. No bodies were recovered. Only a mirror remained, standing upright in the center of the main chamber. It reflected a landscape that wasn't the room, a valley of fog and a crooked sign. Quamgill East 1884. By the late 70s, satellites began recording anomalies in reflected light from the Earth's surface. Entire regions appeared faintly duplicated. Scientists called it Echo Earth. Poets called it the world's second thought. People who stood too long in bright light reported seeing trails of themselves, like afterimages, except those trails turned to look back at 10. The Man on the Shore. An old fisherman in Cornwall, 1980. He wakes before dawn, walks to the edge of the sea. For the first time in years, the water glows faintly, silver, almost mirror-like. He kneels, peers into it. His reflection stares back, older, thinner, eyes hollow. Then the reflection speaks. We've been waiting for the sun to forget you. The water ripples, the sky brightens. But it's not sunrise, it's something else. The light that emerges has texture, like smoke folded in silk. It falls over the fisherman, and for an instant, he remembers every reflection he's ever seen, every mirror, every surface, every glance of himself, all staring back. When the tide recedes, his boots remain on the sand, nothing else. In 1985, a VHS cassette appeared in a second-hand shop in Birmingham. Unmarked except for a sticker, The Light Remembers. When played, it showed random footage, streets, crowds, the sea, then static, then a faint voice. If you are watching this, you are part of the second dawn. A figure appeared in frame, blurry, tall, wearing an inspector's coat. He turned toward the camera. Half his face was shadow. This is how the sun dies, not by burning out, but by remembering too much. The screen faded to black. When technicians tried to replay the tape, It recorded itself over with live footage of the room they were in, except one detail. The camera angle was from behind them. By the 1990s, astronomers confirmed it. The sun's measured brightness was unchanged, but its reflection from Earth had dropped dramatically. Something in the planet's surface was absorbing not energy, but memory. Cities became dim, not dark, like living in a photograph that had lost its contrast. Mirrors were outlawed. Photographs dissolved over time. The world entered what came to be called the era of fading. One morning, in what used to be Cardiff, a young child found an old notebook among the ruins of a government facility. On its cover, a wreath. Inside, the last entry read, "Light once showed the world, now it keeps it. When every shadow has smiled, the memory will close its eyes." She looked up. The dawn was gray, but alive, swirling faintly, almost breathing. And in the distance, beyond the hills, she saw a valley covered in fog. A sign stood at its edge, half buried, still legible beneath the dust. Quomgil St. 1884. She smiled softly, not knowing why. Behind her, her shadow smiled too. The first lightning strike hit at 9:47 p.m. The sound didn't echo. It rolled, as if the valley itself exhaled. Detective Raymond stood at the church steps, his coat soaked through. The bell above him swung violently, ringing once for every soul that had gone missing, though no one pulled its rope. The town below was sinking into a thick gray floodwater that glimmered without reflection. It wasn't rainwater. It smelled of iron and moss, like water that had been sleeping a very long time. He looked toward the houses on Wren Street, roofs shifting, foundations rippling as if they were breathing. The ground itself pulsed beneath the mud, and in that pulse he heard a rhythm, faint, deliberate, drip, drip, heartbeat, pause. The lights of the town flickered in unison with the thunder, then went out entirely. Only the sound remained. Inside the old inn, Mrs. Halley stood before the mirror, brushing her hair by candlelight. The mirror trembled slightly. Then her reflection blinked. Half a second too late, she froze. Behind her, the candle flame stretched, bending toward the glass. The reflection smiled. She did not. And as thunder cracked once more, water began dripping from her reflection's eyes, streaming down the glass like tears. Mrs. Halley screamed, but the sound gurgled, muffled by the rising flood below the floorboards. Raymond forced his way through knee-deep water toward the dam road. Each flash of lightning revealed pieces of the town rearranged. Buildings had moved, shifted slightly off their foundations, like a hand had stirred them and forgotten where each belonged. Then he saw it, the well once sealed, now wide open. From within, light shimmered, pale blue, flickering like fish scales under moonlight. He approached, wind howling around him, and peered down. he saw something impossible. The entire town mirrored beneath the surface, upside down, shimmering in the flood like a reflection on living glass. And from its streets, people were walking toward the surface, not away. The storm roared. The church bell broke free and crashed into the square, its sound deep and distorted, reverberating underwater before it even touched the ground. Then silence. The rain stopped, but the town continued to sink, inch by inch, as if pulled by an unseen tide. Raymond whispered, "The lake's not returning. We're the ones going back." The sun rose on what should have been the 6th day since the storm began. But in this valley, no sunrise came. A dense silver fog hung heavy over the land, and when the wind blew, it carried the sound of water rippling, though there was no lake in sight anymore. But beneath the ground there was. The old lake, drained centuries ago to build the town, had never truly dried. The villagers' houses had been built upon its bed, and the weight of their lives, their prayers, their sins, had pressed slowly through the soil. What was once still water had become a dark, pulsing thing, heavy with memory. Detective Raymond walked through the mist, his lantern barely cutting through the vapor. The air smelled of copper and something old, like wet stone. He followed the faint trail of footprints, child-sized barefoot, that led to the edge of the dry well. He peered down. Water shimmered faintly far below. Then a voice. "Mr. Raymond," it whispered. "You shouldn't be here." He froze. It was the little girl's voice, but she'd been dead for 3 days. The detective dropped a flare into the well. As it fell, it illuminated the smooth inner walls that were not stone at all, but flesh-like. The flare hit the water with a hiss, and for a moment he saw dozens of faces just below the surface, eyes open, mouths moving. They weren't breathing, they were mimicking. The whisper came again, but this time from behind him. "Do you know why the water remembers?" He turned slowly, and standing in the fog was the girl. Her skin was pale, translucent, and the veins beneath glowed with a faint bluish light. Her eyes shimmered like reflections of the flare. "It remembers everything buried inside," she said. Every scream, every lie. Behind her, shapes began rising from the ground. Arms, shoulders, heads. The townspeople, the ones missing, the ones thought drowned in the flood, were crawling up from beneath the soil, their bodies dripping with thick black water. Raymond stepped back, his foot sinking into mud that hadn't been there a second ago. The ground pulsed once, as if something beneath was breathing. Then the girl smiled, soft, sad, almost human. "You can't arrest what never died," she whispered. The ground gave way. Raymond fell into darkness. Water swallowed him whole, and deep beneath the earth, he saw the town again, every house upside down, swaying gently in the current, lights still burning in their windows. A shadow drifted over them like a cloud. The lake had come home. There was no impact when Raymond hit the water. It was as though the lake had swallowed him in silence, folding over itself like fabric. The world above vanished. No light, no sound, only a faint hum, like the vibration of an enormous, sleeping heart. When he opened his eyes, he wasn't drowning, he was standing. The water moved around him like mist, thick and shimmering, but it didn't suffocate, it drifted through him. His steps echoed faintly on what looked like a cobblestone street, the same as the one above, except everything here floated weightless, swaying gently, as if suspended in a dream. The houses were upside down, their rooftops brushing the surface above like ghosts. Lamps glowed with a faint bluish fire. Curtains moved, though there was no wind, and in the distance the church bell tolled, deep, distorted, as if ringing from the bottom of the world. Raymond turned toward the sound. The townspeople were there, dozens of them. They walked slowly through the submerged streets, eyes open, mouths moving, whispering in unison words that didn't carry through the water. He followed them toward the church. The wooden doors opened without a sound. Inside, every pew was filled. The congregation sat motionless, staring at the pulpit. At the altar stood a figure, tall, draped in black robes that flowed like ink. Its face was smooth, featureless, except for two hollow spaces where water trickled out continuously, forming tiny streams that pooled at its feet. It spoke without moving its mouth. The voice was inside Raymond's head. You called this place forgotten, but it was you who were buried. Every prayer built above our bones became a weight. Every word of denial made the water rise. Raymond's chest tightened. What are you, memory? It whispered. The shape of every drowned truth. The congregation turned toward him. Their faces rippled, becoming reflections of people he'd known. The victims, the missing, the ones whose names he'd written in reports that no one ever read. They began to hum, low, steady, mournful. The sound wasn't just in his ears. It vibrated through his bones, shaking dust loose from the church rafters, rippling through the liquid air. Raymond stumbled back outside, gasping, though there was no air to gasp. The entire mirror town shimmered now, unstable, its structures shifting like smoke. He looked up and saw through the wavering ceiling of the lake the faint silhouettes of the real town above. Buildings, streets, people running in panic. Two worlds, reflections of each other, connected by water, by memory. He realized then the curse wasn't the lake. It was the guilt of the living, the dam built on a graveyard, the denial of the drowned, the silence of generations pretending not to hear the echoes beneath. And now the water was evening the balance. A child's voice echoed softly behind him. You're not meant to stay. It was the little girl again. Her eyes glowed faintly blue, her voice calm. "But you have to take something with you, or it will follow." She held out a small object, a rusted pocket watch, its glass cracked, the hands ticking backward. "It remembers the last minute before the flood," she said. "Keep it closed. Never listen." Then the world began to shake. The houses groaned, collapsing upward toward the light. The lake roared, pulling everything into spirals of shimmering current. Raymond felt himself rising, the current dragging him toward the ceiling of light, the surface, the waking world. Just before breaking through, he heard the voice once more. "The lake does not forgive. It only remembers." He woke to silence. The rain was gone. The valley shimmered under a pale gray dawn. Mist rolled low over the ground, soft as breath, hiding what was left of the town. Raymond lay on the cracked asphalt of Wren Street, soaked, coughing up a single mouthful of black water. When he looked around, the world felt slightly wrong. Buildings leaned at strange angles, windows fogged from the inside, and the air carried the faint smell of rust and wet stone. He called out. No one answered. The church stood crooked, its bell missing, its shadow stretching longer than the building itself. He wandered through the ruins. Everywhere, the walls bore watermarks, like veins spreading upward. Inside the bakery, loaves of bread floated weightless in stagnant pools. In the barber's shop, the mirrors were gone. Only empty wooden frames remained, reflecting nothing at all. He heard something ticking, the pocket watch. He pulled it from his coat. Its hands spun backward, slow, deliberate. Inside the cracked glass, he saw a faint reflection, not his own. It was the girl's. "You came back," she whispered from within the watch. He froze. "Where is everyone?" "They're still here, just deeper." The lake kept them, but it left you the silence. Raymond's voice trembled. "Why me?" "Because you remembered," she said softly, "and the lake spares only those who do." He looked toward the horizon. The valley was no longer a valley, it was a mirror, a vast sheet of still, black water stretched from hill to hill. The town was gone, resting somewhere beneath that calm surface, lights faintly flickering far below like drowned stars. He stood at the edge, the wind tugging gently at his coat. For a long moment he listened, the kind of listening that makes your heartbeat sound like thunder. The water whispered faintly, words he couldn't quite understand. It wasn't calling, it was thanking. He dropped the pocket watch into the lake. It vanished without a sound, only a ripple spreading slowly until the whole surface moved like breathing glass. That evening, the rescue teams arrived from the next town over. They found Raymond sitting by the shore, staring at the mirror-flat water. They said the valley must have collapsed during the storm. Geological failure, freak event, no survivors. He nodded, silent. When they asked what had happened, he simply said, "The lake woke up." They thought he was delirious. But when they lifted him into the truck, one of the rescuers glanced back at the water and swore he saw a light flicker deep below the surface. A bell toll echoed faintly, just one, and then the ripples stopped. The valley slept again.